Afternoon. I am the warm-up guy for the proper fundraisers. Strictly speaking, I'm also now the former director of the Adelaide Festival, so I'm available should any of you. I'll try not to be rude to anyone in that case. Listen, I don't have visuals. Once you get bored of looking at my face, feel free to look up cat videos. I think the test case I want to discuss is myself. For the past 25 years, I started life professionally in the United Kingdom, then moved to the States, and then moved to Australia, and have some reflections and observations which may or may not be useful or interesting, but hey, let's give it a go. It's interesting to note that the very, very first job I had raises quite an interesting philanthropic model insofar the philanthropists in question are the Communist Party, who, and specifically a bunch of left-wing fighters from the Spanish Civil War who returned to the UK in the 1880s, which, by the way, was not when I started in this job. It feels like it sometimes, but they came back from the Spanish Civil War, and they wanted to do something collectively and socially engaging as a result of their experience. And they opened a chain of theatres across the United Kingdom called the Unity Theatres. And my first job was, there were 25 of them actually back then, and the last one standing was the Unity Theatre in Liverpool, which was the first theatre I ever worked in, which at the time was a leaky synagogue where I learned more about this art form than, my work began there. Because when anyone didn't turn up, you did it. You did the cafe, you ran the desk. But actually, I ended up as the co-director in there, but basically went in and started out doing marketing. And after a couple of years really learning my ropes, I moved to one of the three most heavily funded institutions in the United Kingdom, which you've already heard quite a lot about from Chris. I have a slightly different take on things. I quite like those mouldy old walkways, so they're a trip down memory lane for me. But I was taken in there to change the programming mix. And I knew from my very first meeting at the South Bank that I was in the proper arts. I was summoned to see the fabulous then Chief Executive, Richard Pulford. And I walked into his office, and he said, "I'm just back from the doctor's." I told him, "I'm having some problems with my entrance." And he said, "Mr. Pulford, those of us in the medical profession prefer to think of that as the exit." And we spoke for 20 minutes, and I walked out of his office, and I thought, why did he just tell me that story? I knew I'd arrived. Do you know, I only just thought that story sitting in the pub 10 minutes ago. So I was taken in there to change the mix, take the programming mix, because along with working in theatre, I was also a music journalist, which actually was how I made my living. I was brought in initially as the deputy director of music, which meant I worked with a lot of puzzled orchestras, and then that moved over into my own unit when I started the Meltdown Festival. That was back in the day when festivals just lasted for 3 weeks on the South Bank, not 52. Festival fatigue? Never heard of it. So 1995, Elvis Costello was the turning point one. He said the name of the festival sounded like a sandwich, which was obviously very rude because I came up with the name, but I'm still in his memoirs. We had, it was the first festival to engage a musician as a curator. And now that seems like you chuck a house brick and you find a curated festival. But those days, no one had actually called a musician a curator before. So Laurie Anderson did one, Nick Cave did one, John Peel did one, Scott Walker, and it was a paradigm shift. They were very, very successful. It changed the mix of the program. It completely transformed the relationship of the audience. It was really, quite interestingly, right at the front end of the start of the change that Chris was talking about this morning. In fact, I was in the meeting when the then marketing director came in and said, British Airways would like to rent a corner of Jubilee Gardens to put up a Ferris wheel 2.5 times the size of Big Ben that's going to take 20 minutes to do one full circuit. And he was basically laughed out of the room. But now everyone's got one. And the London Eye was the start of that huge, huge shift in the South Bank and all those lovely mouldy walkways getting removed. So that was an interesting time. I mean, it led to some interesting conversations and engagement with the mainstream and convincing the hardcore from 1951, basically, that you could actually, that both could coexist in the same space. And it was a very interesting 8 years for me. Then Los Angeles came calling, and if I'd known then what I know now, I'd have changed my phone number. But, you know, je ne regrette rien. Moving to California, the first meeting of the California Arts Council, when I realized that California was really happy that it had its grant put up to $3 million for the whole state, which at the time was the 9th largest economy in the world. I realized I'd come from a venue that received 6 times as much funding as the state of California. And also that the city of Berlin at that point gave more money to the arts than the entire United States of America. And you start to realize why philanthropy and fundraising is so well evolved in the United States, because it had to be. And I was thrown in at the deep end. The program I inherited had to generate 90% of its own budget between box office and fundraising, which skewed around 60-40, which meant I was responsible for $3 million a year, fundraising with a team of 4, never having raised a penny in my life before, and boy did I suck. I was terrible at it at first, and I know now why. It's because I went in there thinking, as long as I upset no one, they'll give me money. So I would go in and be as boring and anodyne and completely drab as I possibly could. And no one gave me any money, because no one gave anyone any money just because they didn't upset them. And it's true, it's been said here so many times, individuals give to individuals, and I learned, I did all my learning about fundraising in the United States. My turning point came, the first meeting of a woman who controlled a major family trust in Los Angeles. And the Americans know this, the Australians might not. A lot of the money in the arts comes from family trusts, which is money held in trust that does not have to pay death duties as long as it disperses its interest every year. In other words, they have to give the money away. So you are lined up trying to find people interested in the arts to control these family trusts. And I had lunch with a woman who sat across, I did my big sales pitch, and she said to me, "Are you trying to tell me I should give my money to your arts program rather than for digging clean water wells in West Africa?" It's a valid question. And I said, "No, I'm telling you that if you only had the money to choose one or the other, I wouldn't be buying you lunch." She is still the board chair of UCLA Performing Arts. That's when I knew I'd got over the hump of being polite to rich people. And I was warned before I went to LA that I was going to spend my life raising money, and it kind of did turn out that way. I managed a building a year. I was programming the building year-round. I managed 40 staff, but I did still spend more time sucking up to rich old people than anything else in my entire life. I put on about 2 stone in weight just from all the lunches and dinners. But the thing to know, and it's very, I was talking to Lindsay about this yesterday, about the different approach to academic fundraising in the United States, because it was the first time I saw the acronym POE at the top of a document that had come from the Chancellor's office, I think. And I said to one of my staff, "What's POE?" He said, "Oh, no, it's point of entry." I said, "What?" I said, "No, it's us, the hospital, and athletics, or what they have so they can get donors in." I thought, well, that's flattering. That's not because we're doing an arts program, it's just that we're used to cream donors. And I can't speak for the whole United States, I can only speak from my experience. Well, personally, what would happen, they would keep a watchful eye on the donors we brought in, and as soon as they saw somebody who was good for a building, we called it Edifice Complex in LA, they'd be creamed off, and we couldn't go near them again. And not only could we not ask them for money, we couldn't even ask them for their annual subscription. I had donors that went from $100,000 a year to nothing. We still had to service their requirements as if they were $100,000 givers, but we didn't dare ask them for a penny because they'd just given $7 million for a building on the other side of campus. So it was a challenging relationship, and for me, and then the GFC hit, so that was fun. But it wasn't philanthropy in my personal experience, it wasn't the philanthropy that actually failed for me in Los Angeles. It was the relationship of that particular bit of it to academia, because we were extremely successful even through the GFC. But how that all turned out is the subject of a whole other speech and subsequent lawsuit, so I won't go on about that anymore. So I came to Australia and quite early on asked the question, so how much money do we raise from the board? To which puzzled silence was my response, and they said, oh no, we pay the board for turning up. I went, what, so the board costs us money? How does that work? Because my board was, in the States, my board was principally a fundraising give or get. They all had to pay $10,000 to be on there, which made us a cheap date, by the way. But they also were responsible for finding or giving another 30 every year. And so there were hundreds of the buggers. I mean, we got $500,000 off the board a year. And it is one of the things about Australia that completely, talk about we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. I find how hey, I'm going to get into trouble anyway. The board thing in this country is something that completely bemuses me. The fact that people get paid to be on boards, I don't think it's Australia-wide. But in South Australia, I know they're trying to backpedal a wee bit, but it is bonkers to me that board members get paid. It obviously should be the other way around. Anyone who is paying their board members, go back to your offices and stop paying them at once. And tell them they have to give you money. That's what it's supposed to be about. So that's your first takeaway. Adelaide's been great. I have to say, I've had 4 fantastic years. It's a festival that, it was one of they based it on Edinburgh in 1960, which was, there'd only been about 10 Edinburgh festivals by that point. They were completely right. It's a small city with a large festival and a gigantic fringe, so it transforms itself for a month. What do you, oh God, oh wow, really? Time flies. Is anyone looking at cat videos yet? But I just finished last week, which is why I'm faintly hysterical and why I've got no visuals. But we've, over the course of the 4 festivals, I just put the first ever arts show into the Adelaide Oval. 26,000 paying punters. I can't tell you how nice that feels. But also, as a value proposition, this is another point I want to make. It's the first time ever that we've charged for the giant opening event. And when we did it for free, on a free basis, for a lot of the last 40 years or so, about 20,000 people turned up. 26,000 people, however, paid for a ticket. I think that's a very important statistic. 6,000 people more came when we charged for it. So be careful what you give away for nothing, that's what I'll say. I think it's quite interesting looking at the varying stages of cultural philanthropy. I mean, especially, obviously, as I've already said, if there wasn't a very highly evolved American system, there wouldn't be any arts in the United States. And Australian cultural philanthropy is at that point of just having come out of the cave and realize that if you hit something with a pointy stick, you can eat it later, in evolutionary terms. But it's going to have to get there. I mean, the government won't keep giving the money. But I think the most important thing I have to say in terms of what I've witnessed across my time is never, ever, ever indicate that you're letting the government off the hook by going out raising your own money. Don't ever, ever let people think you're saying replacement as opposed to supplement. It's a very important fact. I've seen it happen. I've seen people be penalized for the success of their fundraising. So there is still government support in this country, which, even though it's dwindling, is still better than most places, and certainly better than the United States. The other takeaway for me, I mean, I take nothing away from, it's been very inspiring listening to everyone speak, but the other thing about the American model, and if you say that expression to most American artists, they will just laugh hollowly back at you and say, what model, is that it doesn't, it favors the established. Of course it does. It's old money often. It's often old people giving it. So I remember the first time I went into the offices of the Wooster Group. For those of you who aren't au fait in the performing arts, the Wooster Group are probably the most important contemporary theatre company in the United States. Willem Dafoe came out of the Wooster Group. It's huge. And I went into their office, and it was like a set for the opening scene of Christmas Carol. where Bob Cratchit asks if he can have some more coal. And I sat there in this shitty office, and I thought, but you're the Wooster Group, and this is the problem with the American model. It tends not to favor the new, or the innovative, or the art forms that look like they haven't been there for at least 100 years. I mean, I think I'm going to wrap up now, because I've realized my time's up. That was quick. I mean, I think I wanted to finish on a kind of what else is there out there note, because I feel like the last talk was really interesting about that whole thing about exploring new dynamics and new systems. It's really interesting talking to festivals around the world. I know there's at least one major festival fighting for a hotel tax in a town that's never done it. When I was in Los Angeles, Cerritos, which is a suburb of LA, was the major car producing part of California. They introduced a tax on cars. I think the whole conversation around economic benefit, because it's accepted. No one argues that those economic benefit numbers aren't real, but no one is actually collectively campaigning for getting a piece of that up front. I know that for I mean, they give us $8 million in Adelaide, the state. They get $22 million back in economic benefit. It's a fantastic investment as far as I can see, but drilling down and campaigning to make that money feed back somehow into the system, I don't have the answers, I just have lots of questions. I feel like there's everything to play for. I think it's, actually I feel, as Homer Simpson would say, the Chinese have the same word for crisis and opportunity, and it's crisis-opportunity. And I feel like that's kind of where the arts are in this country at the moment. I feel like things feel bad, but they're not as bad as all that. And as has been said several times, they're definitely going to get worse. However, I feel like it's a completely open field at the moment, and the people that will get through it are the ones who work out the ways to deal with it in interesting and new ways. I'm going to stop and hand over to the real fundraisers. Thank you for listening, and now look up pictures of cats.